Hello and welcome to All Grown Up and Going to Preschool as we transition from Part C to Part B services. DeEtte Snyder is with us and will guide us through this first transition when families move from family-centered early intervention services to school-based special education programs and services. At the end of our 90 minutes together, you will be able to articulate the three differences between early intervention and preschool services. You will be able to explain three key activities that occur during that transition process and list three ways to support parents and teachers as you navigate through this transition process. And while we have a world community joining us today, we will give the caveat that this does center the presentation on how we serve students in the United States through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I know that we'll hear a little bit more about that, but we are glad that you are with us for the next 90 minutes.
Amy, are you passing it over?
I am passing it over. We are delighted that you are with us, DeEtte.
Hi, everybody. My name is DeEtte Snyder, and forgive the voice. I am just coming off of a little cold, and so I am eating my cough drops, and hopefully my voice will continue. I've got my glass of water, so I appreciate your grace. So I'm going to read this screen. I was a preschool classroom teacher for about 10 years prior to becoming a Part C service coordinator for children under the age of 3 who are blind or low vision. And I've basically my whole career, I have lived in both the Part C and the Part B world, and we will explain that a little bit more later. My passion is really assisting families on their journey with their children, and especially as they move between systems of support. So even those of you who join us today from outside of the United States, we all have different systems that support children that are sometimes based on age groups. And so that's moving from school to school or just different systems of support. And really the first transition in a child's educational journey is from early intervention to preschool. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And so let's get started. Please, if you have any comments, go ahead and or questions, put them in the chat so that I can answer them as we go along. This is the fourth in the series of early childhood promising practices, and each time I have shared with you about the 5 pillars of early intervention. And so they are family-centered practices, which was basically the first of our series back in January. And then number 2 is natural environments. 3, children's learning. 4, adults learning, specifically caregivers or people who are close to the child, and then also quality teaming. And so today's webinar is going to be really focused on family-centered practices, but then also quality teaming. Teaming is really critical for a smooth and seamless transition, and it takes communication and collaboration between the Part C system and also the Part B. And you might be wondering, what is Part B and Part C? So as Amy mentioned, this is really focused on the United States federal law of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And Part C of that act is for children birth to age 3, and then Part B is for children aged birth to 21 when they exit out and enter another realm. So I just want to make sure that we understand that. So these are the two pillars that we're going to kind of focus on today. So what is transition? What are we really talking about here? So we're really talking about the move from one educational program to another, or it could be a life stage, moving through life stages. It could be moving from one classroom to another, or from one teacher to another, or so just the movement that happens all the time. But the first big transition is from what we call early intervention into preschool. And it really happens when a child turns 36 months or 3 years, but it really kind of officially begins between 2.5 or 2.6 years old, or 30 months, to about 2.9 years old, which would be 33 months. So there's kind of this gray area where these are the activities that are happening during that transition. And IDEA, again, assures that children and families experience a smooth and effective transition. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, about how there's activities that have been put in place that assures that smooth and effective transition. And this really happens through that team approach with the family, the EI team, the school team, that all has a teacher of students who are blind or low vision in both settings, or in both systems that work together. Okay, so we have diverse systems. We all, every state of the United States have a different system, every region, every local area, we all have different systems. And so what I'm going to be kind of talking about today is kind of in general terminology. And so it might be different in your particular system. So just remember that. But in all of our systems, some TVIs work in birth to 3 programs. And so they're the ones that are going to hand off to the next. And some TVIs work in the 3 to 21 age programs. And so they will be the receiving teachers. And some TVIs, and you might see that I use terminology, TVI, TSBVI. So just know that those are kind of interchangeable. Some TVIs work across the entire spectrum of ages. And so they may continue to provide services regardless. But it's still important that parents know the difference between systems, especially Part C and Part B, even if it's the same TVI that follows that child, because the system has still changed. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. So I'm going to describe IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law here in the United States, the difference between Part C and Part B. And I think that you've probably heard me say this before, but it's important for this particular webinar, because this is what we're dealing with, moving from one system to the next. So in Part C, we do indirect instruction through parent coaching, and that is a really big tenet in early intervention, or Part C, birth to 3 services. We also have an individual's family service plan, or what we call an IFSP, and you notice that family is included in that plan, individualized family service plan. Services are really delivered within a natural environment. Natural environment is a tenet in IDEA Part C, and it really is all about, sometimes it's the home environment, but it's also in an environment that children typically participate in with their non-disabled peers. So it could be a daycare center, it could be a community center like the park. Natural environments are not just a location, but also it's about services and materials. So like the toy bag. Toy bags aren't part of natural environments. Anyway, so natural environments is one of the tenets of Part C. Also, the focus is really about the child's participation within the family's routine. So it's not necessarily geared to the child's needs or skills that they work on, but it's more within the family's routine. So it's participation within the family's routine. It may include outside or non-Part C private therapy services like physical therapy, occupational therapy. Those services are also a part of Part C services, but also sometimes they are considered outside that are like private therapy services. So I just want to mention that. I also want to mention that Part C does not include FAPE. Some people don't understand that. FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education, which is a tenet of Part C, because some systems have comprehensive systems of payment that might include family participation in payments. There's also medical insurance that sometimes pays for that. So FAPE is not a part of Part C services. Let's go over and talk about Part B. Now, when a child turns 3, this is the shift. This is where the shift from these family-centered routine activities switches and turns more educational. So Part B is direct instruction to child and might include consultation to the classroom team, for instance. Instead of having an IFSP, you have an IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan. Notice family's not in this anymore. Instead of natural environments, we have least restrictive environment, or LRE is what they also call that. So lots of alphabet soup in this webinar today, so I will try to walk us through the alphabet soup. But least restrictive environment means that a child participate in the educational setting with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. And the focus is really about not necessarily family routines anymore. It's about the child's participation in the classroom and also the access to curriculum. How is this child going to access all of the materials and everything that's going on to the classroom the same as their non-disabled peers, or for our kids who are blind or low vision, the same as their sighted peers? Also, it might include outside or non-Part B private therapy services that children might go to after school or before school. And so that's could be a part of it as well. And then also we have FAPE, FAPE, which stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. So this is where now all children aged 3 to 21 have the right to have free and appropriate public education. So when we talk about transition, sometimes we really talk about, that it's the child's transition, but I like to kind of view that transition is happening to the family as well, not just the child. And so again, every state, county, and local school district will sometimes have a different system. And so each of you need to kind of understand what your system is. I don't know where you live. I know what my system is. I live in the state of Washington. And I know what the system is here in my state and in my local community and within my school districts that I work with. And it's important for you to know yours. But regardless, parents are the ones who don't know the system the way we do. And sometimes I like to call that the wizard behind the curtain. Those of you who are Wizard of Oz fans might know that terminology. It's what's the secret sauce? What's really going on here that that we need to bring in front and be honest with parents about what the steps are and what are the processes. And so it's really important for this information to be shared with parents so that they can move from one system to another. And I know that we have a couple of parents here today, which is great. But it's important that parents be able to lean on the professionals that they are with so that can help guide them. Okay. So let's talk about parents a little bit. And I have some cute pictures here on my screen. The top picture is of a mom holding her child. She's kissing her child as a goat at the petting zoo is also kissing her child. The middle picture is a dad and a little boy in a pumpkin patch picking out a big orange pumpkin. And then the last picture is of a father standing with his son, and his son is holding a cane in front of him, and he's holding his dad's hand. So let's kind of walk through what parents are kind of thinking about as we are approaching this big change in their lives. So, and again, we're having these conversations at various times before the child turns 3 and kind of usually when the child nears 3, but let's kind of talk about it a little bit more. So they might be saying preschool, but she's still a baby. Well, this is where we can really kind of talk about what the differences is between early intervention and preschool, and that the age requirements for these services sometimes vary. So again, conversations happen when a child is in early intervention at every 6-month and annual IFSP review. So it's always talked about, and it might be an awkward conversation when the child is 6 months old, but they need to be thinking that early intervention does end when a child turns 3. And so we need to get ready for that. I do want to mention that there are some states in the United States that Part C might continue until age 5. I know that my neighboring state, Oregon, has that classification. I'm not going to talk about that today, but that's just another nuance of our diverse systems. So they might be thinking, but he's not potty trained. And we have to really talk about that developmental readiness is not a requirement for moving on to Part B in preschool. And that early intervention does end at the child's 3rd birthday. And so we need to have that conversation that they don't need to be potty trained. It's okay. You mean you can't come anymore? I really get a lot out of our visits. And so this is when another conversation where we can talk about the movement from family-centered practices and early intervention to child-centered services in preschool. And really talking about parent readiness. You know, is the parent really ready for their child to move on to a different system? And that parent participation is still included and still encouraged in Part B services or preschool, but it just might look a little different. But then they can also continue to learn about their child from their new teachers and then the new type of services that their child is going to be receiving. But then also this might be a really great opportunity for you to connect parents to other parents through maybe your system has a parent-to-parent support program. This might be a really great opportunity to move services and supports from professional to parent into parent-to-parent support. It might be time for that. So number 4, the parent might be thinking, I don't want to know how delayed he is. And let me just say, this is a real thing. And parents know in their hearts but sometimes they don't want to hear it from other people. And I've seen this over and over again. And also not all children are delayed. So just remember that. But the IEP process, including eligibility and all of the assessments and creating appropriate goals and outcomes for a new placement, it's important to really deliver all of that information sensitively. And so to kind of prepare parents that yes, their child has to go through an evaluation, and yes, they will be shared those results, but it's important to kind of, prepare them that this is information that is important to know in order to create an appropriate program based on their child's strengths and needs. They might be thinking, but they don't know him like you do. And it's important. So this is where you really talk about knowledge about preschool and what happens there and who is there, and it might include a school visit. The getting to know the preschool is an important component of the transition conference that we're going to talk about later. But remember, remind them about when you were new as well, and that you got to know their family and you got to know their child, and that the new teachers will as well. And that's okay to have more people in this child's life. And I always like to call it a building of the fan club. And so there's going to be more people added to this child's fan club. Number 6, my child will not ride a school bus alone. This is a big one that parents really talk about, is the school bus, and that anxiety that a parent might feel about their baby riding in a vehicle without them. That is a really big deal. And I think that most of us who have taught preschool, who have been in preschool environments, know that sometimes that school bus ride is probably the highlight of the child's day, but they just don't know it yet. And the parent doesn't know it yet either. And so this is where you can let the parents know that they still have choices. He doesn't have to ride the school bus, and that the parents still have controls and they still have rights as the child parents. But it's important to acknowledge these fears and talk about it, because it's a part of that transition. Again, it's not just the transition for the child, it's also the transition for the parent. And change is hard. And so it's very natural. So this slide says the change is hard. It's human nature to do the familiar and want to stay there. I've known parents, a lot of families, that don't want to move to preschool. They just want to stay and keep their child in their home. And you know what? And that is okay. Parents do not have to send their child to preschool. They can. There's lots of different options. They are not obligated to send their child to preschool. But at the same time, parents have perfected this EI game. They've built it into their routine. They know how this works. And now this is a shakeup. This is different. They're not going to have people coming into their home anymore. And so now they need to learn a new system. And what is that about? And that big, scary system of the school. School is a big deal. And so it's important that we create that warm handoff. And so that it doesn't have to be this cut off of this, then that we can have the warm handoff. So again, it's helping parents understand the difference between EI and school. And these conversations can have a lot, and it's all about providing information about this unfamiliar system. And if you understand the system, then you can assist your parents. I'm going to take a small break and just take a glass of water. Those of you who live in Oregon and Washington know that we're having a snowstorm today. It's April 11th and it is still snowing outside. There's about 3 inches. So it's kind of cool to watch. Anywho, all right, so let's move on to the next step. The first step is what we call the transition conference. And this is a Part C requirement. So this is something that is required in IDEA under Part C. So let's talk about what this transition conference is all about. So this is where parents are really encouraged to share information regarding their child's development, their concerns, priority, and their goals for preschool. What do they want to see happen? And so it's really intended for this information gathering about preschool. Sometimes preschool placement options are talked about and that are available for their child, and how their child can participate with the accommodations for their needs. It's held between about 2.5 to 2 years, 9 months, but it can be held before if all parties request and agree. And really the location needs to be the parent's choice. Oftentimes the school district will say it needs to be there, but really it's a Part C requirement. And this local school district, if they are an invited participant, then they're an invited participant. But this is a Part C requirement, which means it still needs to kind of happen within that natural environment, which is typically the parent's home, but it could really be anywhere. And then at this conference, a transition plan is created and developed by everybody who's in attendance, and everybody receives a copy of the plan. So again, transition is always brought up at every IFSP review, but sometimes it's just skimmed over because the child might be too young, and it's far away and we don't want to talk about it. But especially if that first IFSP is at 6 months old, for instance. But when a child turns 2 years old, time to really start talking about it, because now it's 1 year away. So who's invited to this transition conference? It can really be anybody that the parent is interested in finding out about. Again, early intervention services stop at age 3. So what's going to happen after age 3? So the local education agency or the local school district is an invited participant, along with other preschool options like community daycare, Head Start, all of these different types of options. Now, the role of the birth to 3, or I'm going to start calling them the EI-TVI, so the early intervention teacher of the visually impaired. Sometimes they come to these meetings, and I feel like it's really important that they come to these meetings to not only support the parent, but also to share information. So they could share functional vision skills, accommodations, and modifications that they have found that work with the families in their routine participation, and build on what the families are already telling all of the attendees, and supporting the parents and their questions. And the goal is this is the handoff provider to share information to the receiving provider and to support the parent. But I feel that the EI-TVI's main role at this conference is to really help advocate that a teacher of the visually impaired is included on the other side. Again, some systems run really smoothly and some systems don't, but it's important that as much information is there as possible. So to me, the EI-TVI at the transition conference can be a real advocate. All right, second step. LEA stands for Lead Education Agency. This really varies across systems, but basically we're talking about local school district. And so we're talking about when does that local school district get the notification that this child may potentially be a student in their school? This is the handing over of the baton. So Part C, which would be the IFSP service coordinator, sends the LEA, which is Part B, the notification referral form either during, prior, or after the transition conference. Again, it's going to vary depending on systems, at the family's request and with consent if the family is interested in the LEA services or the school district services. It must be given to the LEA prior to the child turning 2.9, unless the family opts out. Families can opt out, though families can always change their mind. And there's a certain time limit for that, but we're not going to get into those idiosyncrasies. Again, might be a little diverse systems, processes in your system, but just know that there are some timelines of when the local school district gets an official referral about the child. Now, as soon as they get that referral, now they are now responsible for leading that transition plan that might have been created or should have been created at that transition conference. So they're now responsible for following through with whatever that plan looks like. And so, again, it might be very different depending on whatever system you live in. Looked like that was, oh, there we go. My slide didn't quite work there. So with consent, Part C could share current IFSP, and providers are encouraged to also assist, which would mean share information or participate. So oftentimes the Part C service coordinator will not just share the referral, send the referral, but they might share the latest IFSP with the Part C. They might share latest evaluation reports if they're within a year old. They might, depends on, again, your system's requirement of what type of information is shared. But typically that IFSP is definitely something that should be shared. It's got present level of performance, it's got goals, it's got objectives, it's got what the child is doing now. It might have medical information in it. It should have a lot of information, but providers are also always encouraged to share additional information. So what an EI TVI could possibly share is their up-to-date functional vision assessment or learning media assessment. If they've done something about learning channels, that could also be passed on to the receiving teacher. Sometimes that's part of their exit report, but it's always important to get consent to make sure that the two TVIs could share with one another that information. But again, with consent, information can be shared. That's the handing over of the baton. So the third step is evaluation and determining eligibility. I want to check my time and see where I'm at. So we're doing well. So for children who are blind or low vision, this includes, it should, please, this is the whole point, is it includes the TSBVI, or the teacher of visually impaired, and also the COMS, the certified orientation and mobility specialist, should be part of this evaluation team. So after the LEA notification and referral form is received from Part C, the LEA again will lead the transition plan, which may include a review of the existing data that existed and shared with them by the Part C team. It might include a complete multidisciplinary evaluation team or an MET. Now, again, some systems might have a different name for this, but generally it's the MET evaluations as sometimes needed. MET basically means a multidisciplinary team, which means there should be more than one discipline as a part of this evaluation team. And it's typically headed up by the school psychologist. But for our kiddos, a critical member of this team is, again, the teacher of students with visual impairments or the orientation and mobility specialist. The reason for this is the TVI will not only assist in their own evaluations, which is the functional vision assessments and also the learning media assessments, but they will also assist the other professionals to modify and accommodate their evaluation procedures for the visual and sensory needs of that child. Let's be honest. It might be the first time that this school psychologist has ever evaluated a student with blindness or low vision. They're going to need some consultation. So it's really important to that TVI be a part of that evaluation. And also to interpret the results. This is really critical. So that's the multidisciplinary evaluation. And that could be like a whole nother topic that we're not going to talk about today. Also, part of this plan might be a preschool site visit. Maybe the parent wants to see what, for their own eyes, what could preschool look like? Now, there are various rules for this. Different school districts have different policies regarding parents visiting preschools. With COVID nowadays, maybe outside people aren't allowed in onto school grounds. Maybe a school district has a policy that parents can't teacher shop, those type of things. So just, again, knowing your system can kind of help parents access some of that. Leanne, do we have a question?
So a EI TVI does an LMA or FVA, and then the TVI in the district then has to do another one, write goals and objectives or both. Seems like so much time spent evaluating. Should the EI TVI write the goals and objectives to start with, since they know the student?
You know, that's a really great question. And I think that it's important for the two people to work together. Now, the EI TVI might know this child really, really well, but they know them in a home environment. Now this child is going to be entering a preschool environment. So it is important that, that the receiving teacher write the goals and objectives for the new preschool environment. So it's important, in a perfect world, those two TVIs would work together to write goals and objectives, the EI TVI based on what they know about the child, and the preschool TVI based on what they know about the preschool environment. So those two things kind of need to work together. Did that answer the question, Leanne? Did that answer your question, Leanne?
It was actually Erin's question, and I think she'll write in the chat if it didn't, but she said,
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, we're talking about perfect world here. Yeah, yeah. And yeah. So then after the plan, then the MET meeting is then held to share evaluation results and an eligibility determination with families. Sometimes those are two different meetings. And then, so sometimes there could be three meetings. There could be an MET meeting to share results. There could be an evaluation meeting to determine eligibility. And then there's a third meeting called the IEP, the Individual Education Plan, that is written if eligibility is determined, or if the child is eligible. I had a video here, but I'm not going to play the video. Let's talk about eligibility for a minute. Oops. So in Part B, special education, as a part of IDEA, there must be 3 requirements to meet eligibility for special education. Number 1, an established disability. So blind visually impaired blind visual impairment is an eligibility category, and that needs to be established. So number 1, does the child have a disability? Number 2, does the disability will or does adversely affect educational performance? So how does that blindness and low vision impact their potential educational performance, or maybe a presence of a developmental delay, for instance? And then number 3, does that educational performance or unique need require special instruction with or without accommodations and modifications? Now, something that I like to remember here is that special education is not a location. Let me repeat that. Special education is not a location, but a service. And it's a service that can be provided anywhere, even within a general education environment. So again, a child qualifies or is eligible for special education services, but we have not determined placement yet. This is just eligible criteria. So let's talk about what number 1 is: blindness and visual impairment. This is how IDEA defines it. Visual impairment, including blindness, means an impairment in vision that, even with correction, adversely affects a child's educational performance. The term includes both partial sight and blindness. So this is a very, very broad term for a reason. And also, when we talk about, and there are other categories which the child might also be eligible for. So children aren't just meet one criteria, they might meet other criterias. And there are other eligible categories, but I'm not going to talk about them today because we're just going to talk about blindness and visual impairment. But there's also orthopedic impairment, developmental delay. There's a number of them. Your system might have their own eligibility categories, especially for preschool, that are different. Sometimes they're called preschool severe delay. Sometimes it's developmental delay. It really varies depending on your system. So understand what your eligibility categories are. And all of those eligibility categories are determined through the evaluation process. And I think that's really important to remember. So also, when we talk about special ed as a location or as not a location, sometimes preschool programs within school districts are special ed or developmental preschools for children with special needs. However, there might be other early childhood programs that are inclusive, like Head Start, which is a federally funded program that has its own criteria that are income-based criteria. And also special education services could be provided in the community, like maybe a neighborhood preschool or a church-based preschool or a private preschool. And these are all IEP decisions about where services are going to be determined. And those placement decisions are always the last to be determined after an IEP is written. So don't put the cart before the horse when we talk about. That's why I want to reiterate that special education is not a location, but it's a service. So let's just continue to walk through this. Now, number 3 of that eligibility requirement, I want to mention that number 3, unique needs require special instruction. That relates to the expanded core curriculum. And those of TVIs and even EI, TVIs, and O&Ms, we all know what the 9 categories for expanded core curriculum. That could be like a whole nother webinar, and I'm sure it already is another webinar, but this is where the ECC, or the expanded core curriculum, comes into play for our students. It's part of the last requirement for special ed. Okay, so just note to self. Let's continue talking about eligibility, and I want to talk about the OSEP letter. OSEP stands for the Office of Special Education Programs. And back in I'm going to get another drink. I'm going to get it. The OSEP letter came out in 2017, and it is actually one of your handouts. And I believe that they're going to put a link, Leanne's going to put a link in the box for you to pull up this letter if you have not seen this letter. And I bring this up because it really matters to this conversation. And it was put out by the acting director of the Office of Special Education Programs, and it went out to all state directors of special education. And the subject was eligibility determinations for children suspected of having visual impairment, including blindness, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I'm just going to talk about 3 little takeaways that I took from this letter that really has to do with children moving from Part C to Part B services. So number 1, it really addresses that any level of visual impairment, and it cannot that states cannot narrow the definition to include any types of visual impairment. Remember that IDEA terminology, or that definition, is pretty broad, right? Includes partial sight and blindness, no other definition. So for instance, I'm not going to give you any for instance. It just basically says states cannot narrow that definition to include any child with a disability. Also, you cannot predetermine based on a child's eye condition, especially non-eligibility without an evaluation. So I think this is important only because in early intervention, we might serve a wider range of children with a variety of different visual conditions than Part B does. Only because we're there to support families. We're there to support IFSP teams. We're there to support concerns and priorities. And so if a child has an eye condition, we might be just supporting, but when they enter into preschool, it changes a little bit. But it's so important that eligibility be determined on the evaluation of the child and not just their eye condition. Okay, and I think that we could probably get into debate about that, but I just want to be very clear that this is what the OSEP letter is describing. Also, the third takeaway that I take is you can require a medical diagnosis for eligibility. However, but if diagnosis is to determine eligibility alone, it must be obtained at public expense and be a portion of the comprehensive evaluation procedure. So that means that if a child has never seen an ophthalmologist or an optometrist and they don't have a diagnosis, for instance. You cannot deny services based on a non-diagnosis, because a teacher's evaluation could still determine unique needs. I hope that makes sense. It's obviously very important that all children with any type of eye condition see a doctor for a variety of different reasons, but that medical diagnosis is not required to determine eligibility alone in itself. Amy, do you want to clarify that?
I want to just back up to that first bullet point, if we could. Any level of visual impairment and cannot narrow the definition to exclude. So I want to use that word exclude, that there are, and what we mean by that is that there are no modifiers in that definition. Modifiers meaning 20 over 70 or greater. And so we cannot exclude a child from this particular category because of modifiers.
Yes.
I hope that I'm not muddying the waters with that, but I wanted to make sure just to clarify that we are not able to exclude, and that the definition that we are using that those teams use to make an eligibility determination cannot be more narrow than what IDEA has given us guidance on.
Yes. And I'm sure we can get into a philosophical debate about that, but I just want to put that out there. Determining eligibility is sometimes very complex. And so I don't want you to limit it to one thing only. All children deserve to be evaluated based on their needs. Okay, so let's move on to more fun stuff. So the final step is in by 3. And what that means is, if the child is found eligible, an individual education plan, IEP, meeting is scheduled with the parents to develop the plan, the IEP, to implement preschool services, and also to determine placement. The IEP must be completed within 30 days of the MET, which is where the parents found out that the child has been eligible, but prior to the child's 3rd birthday. If not eligible, a 504 plan for accommodations can be created for the preschool. So there's always options. But I want to remind you that 504 plans do not include instruction. It's just an accommodation. So if a child needs to learn to use the tools as a form of an accommodation, that meets Part B eligibility, because they need instruction on how to use the accommodation, which, again, that's ECC. So, and there are the laws that you can look up. A parent can really invite anybody to this IEP meeting, but again, a TVI should be present, either the former TVI or the receiving TVI, to really represent how vision and learning channels are addressed in the entire plan. I think that's really important for our kiddos. And again, the EI TVI can also support the family and support the parent in that process. Sometimes IEP meetings are very daunting, and there's a lot of people that are there, and these are sometimes strange people. Parents have never met these people before, and so it's always nice to have a friendly face at these IEP meetings. And so if you can swing it, I think it's really important that the handoff teacher or the EI TVI is there the family, and that they're a familiar person at a meeting of unfamiliar people. I think that's a really important component, and that's another really nice way to do the warm handoff of meeting the new people. It's always a nice way to do it. So our next activity is a Jamboard activity. And so let's kind of talk together about these challenges and what sometimes works for you. Maybe you've been a handoff teacher for a long time and you have the strategy that you think everybody should do. Or maybe you're dealing with that strategy, some challenges right now in our diverse system. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open up our Jamboard, and then I'm going to walk you through how to do the Jamboard. Leanne and Amy are going to put the Jamboard link in the chat box. I'm going to pull up our Jamboard.
And currently
We have that dropped
view
in.
only.
Say that again, Leanne.
Currently, the link is showing me view only and no tiles to make a.
I know I haven't opened it yet. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is it working for folks? Can everybody see that?
It is working on my end.
Okay. So if you go to the left-hand side, you will find a sticky note. And open yourselves a sticky note and go ahead and write in your challenge or your what works. And let's talk about it. This is a big topic for people. Amy.
DeEtte, just a quick mention. We don't have stickies that are appearing. So do we need to do something to get our stickies? We see what you have, the yellow challenges, what works, but we don't have a way to generate new stickies.
Really? Let's see. So I can create a sticky. Can you create a sticky?
I am not able to create one. And so I've reloaded to see. Let's just drop into the chat window really quick. If is anyone else having any difficulties accessing the stickies?
Anyone with the link can view. Ooh, viewer, editor,
There
done.
you go.
You guys, technology is our friend. Now you guys can make stickies.
And you
And
will
if you're
just need to refresh.
Correct. Refresh.
If you refresh, you will have access. So we're talking about challenges and what works. So two different sides of the coin.
Yeah, let's just have an open conversation about it.
Well, I know, DeEtte, we chatted a little bit beforehand to think about what some of the challenges were. And I know that behind the scenes, we talked about that sometimes we VI educators that represent part B of that transition don't always know who all the contacts are for part C that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that we had front loaded in advance of thinking about challenges. Yeah.
So sometimes we don't know. So that's another area of know who your system is, know who your EI providers is, or at least the agency. Here are some what works. Go ahead and you can move your stickies around. So one works, meeting with the EI, TVI before I meet the parents and the other team members. Yeah, like we're colleagues, like let's talk. Another what works, staff meeting with all team members prior to holding the IEP meeting. Yeah, like a pre-IEP meeting. Challenge, determining appropriate placement before the child is actually in the preschool classroom. You know, sometimes a lot of school districts will have a variety of placement options. And I think you got to try it out first based on what the goals and objectives and abilities are. But yeah, that's a challenge to make sure that those can be, those match. Someone wrote, encouraging the family service coordinator to invite the TSBVI to the transition meeting. Yeah, this is where your relationships really come in handy. Your relationships with your service coordinator and your relationships with your parents, to make sure that you are included in that process. Challenge, breaking the hearts of parents when I suggest our preschool for special education instead of their daycare preschool. Yeah, but those are options, right? And I think that it's important to explore all of those options and let that kind of sort itself out as a parent goes through that process. I think that we in our heads might know what's best for that child because we see that child, we have a lot of experience and we know all of the different placements, but I think it's important for us not to predetermine what we believe is best, but to let the parents go through that process. But I hear you with that. Challenge, each EI agency in our state does things differently around transition. Yes, they do. Some are vocal and helpful during eligibility meetings and others are quiet as church mice. I think we as professionals all have our own processes. So I think that communication, a lot of you guys have been talking about communication. So if someone's quiet, ask questions, have them answer questions. So that's something that can definitely be done. Challenge, when your available district, so you moved it, has only special ed preschool and the child needs a more typical environment and none are available. Yeah, placement options. This is when you really start to have to get creative and start looking around about what's available. And remember what I said, special education is not a location, it's a service. It can go anywhere. And so those are kind of the creative conversations that you can have with your school districts. What works? Talking about transition as early as possible and often, making sure it becomes a handoff and not a cliff to fall off of. Absolutely. Challenge, ensuring that the family understands all of their options to make the best choice for their child. Yeah, parents have choice. But it's important for them to follow through with this journey and let the evaluations happen. Let it happen. Get the information, do the evaluations, follow the whole entire process. Let's see, what other ones have I not read? Oh, challenges, scheduling. Hello, logistics and semantics. Absolutely. So this is where we have to get a little bit flexible. Let's see, have I not read any of them? So collaboration and communication is not easy and it takes work on both sides. Let's see, be available for many questions that parents and receiving pre-K teachers may have. I agree. I think that is a really important component of our work as EI-TVIs, is to be that good handoff person. It's a part of our services. It's a part of the package. And so it's important that we be available for that. I agree. I think that is what works. Providing support is not the same as acting as a formal advocate. Yes. If there are potential issues, consider connecting the family to other resources for advocacy. Thank you for bringing this up. Most states will have parent advocacy groups that parents can reach out to. Here in the state of Washington, it's called PAVE, P-A-V-E, Parents in Actions, Voices of Empowerment. I believe that's what it's called. So I'm sure that in other states, they have similar groups that can help parents walk through some of those more complicated situations, because we're really talking about a spectrum here. But the most important thing is making sure that parents have the right information. Sometimes parents feel like they need to have a law degree in special education law. And there's nothing wrong with having a parent level special education law class or seminar. Sometimes that's important to kind of know what this system is and why it works the way it works and how it all means, because it's a new system. So again, it's that building that confidence in that new system. I use now a Meet Me book. I love that. Some people do have that. I work with parents to develop the book about 6 months prior to going to school. It has everything typically grown-ups would share when they first meet, but I can't see the rest of that. I love Meet Me books. I think that they're great. I love when there's pictures of kids like in their standards or with their equipment that they use, and having it come from that parent's point of view. There is a template that's available on our WSSB, the Washington State School for the Blind's website, that you can, for a Meet Me book. I could always include that as a handout, Amy. I'll send that to you as a handout. That could be a really great way to have a very person-centered, child-centered introduction to a kid. Yeah, who am I? What do I like? So there's a lot of them out there. In fact, APH has a wonderful tool. Oh man, I should have it with me, and I should have it at the top of my head. There is a preschool readiness transition book. Amy, do you remember what the name of it? It's escaping me now, but it is an APH book.
We are frantically looking that up right now because I see it in my brain. I can't pinpoint it, but we're going to drop it in the chat in just a moment.
Yeah, I do too. But it's a really great way to create a very child-centered way of sharing with the new people who are going to have this new little person as in their fan club. They're going to be joining the fan club. They need to know who they're cheering for. So thank you for bringing that up, the Meet Me book. I love that. Anything else? Oh, it has everything typically grown-ups would share when they first meet, but now you meet the child and the family in the book, and the parents share it with whoever they want at the school. I love them. Again, I like the APH one. Ooh, something just happened where everything went away.
You had just turned at the page. That's all. So if you flip back at the top, okay.
It's
looks
gone.
like you hit delete, which can happen on accident. People,
it happened last time. Okay, I'm going to stop share. Thank you guys for sharing all of your challenges. I think that the takeaway for this is to communicate, collaborate, work together, know your system, know that there are requirements on both sides, and that the whole goal is to really help families walk through this journey, because early intervention does end at age 3, and we need to get them to be prepared for the what's next. So if anybody has any final questions in the chat.
Well, while that's percolating, could it be what you were thinking of is getting to know you, a social skills and ability awareness curriculum Could
No,
that have been that? Nope.
no,
Okay. I thought that also had a book in it that you put together a book about me. Oh, what did Leanne do? Nope. Okay.
The same thing. It's getting to know you. It's
Okay.
Reach for the Stars. Someone just put that. It's Reach for the Stars. It's called Reach for the Stars. Someone
All
put
right.
it in there. Yeah, Pamela, thank you. Yes, it is called Reach for the Stars. And I am sorry that I did not include that in this presentation because it
Okay.
is a fabulous resource. It's
Planning for the future.
Yeah, Reach for the Stars. And it's not just good for preschool transitions, but it is good for any transition. Even if a child is going to be getting a new teacher, I think it's fabulous.
Wow. Well, there was a great deal of information that we covered today to cover this process. It's not easy. It's not easy to talk about, articulate. The variability you mentioned, you tapped into that, DeEtte. The variability of depending on where you live in the United States, things could differ a little bit. The language might be a little bit different. So it's all about knowing what happens at the local level. However, what you were able to depict is what IDEA says that we need to do. And that is at the foundation and the core. So thank you for walking through those scaffolded steps. Also, you mentioned ideal. We know that the situations that are at hand are not always ideal, such as when we're going through the eligibility process, that whole evaluation. I loved that you talked about what is ideal is to have both of those Part B and Part C VI educators working together. And we know that that's not always the case. Mm-hmm. We talked beforehand that in the state where I live in North Carolina, we are over 50% contracted base. So what that means is if we have a child that is in our early intervention program, there may not be a teacher of students with visual impairments and orientation mobility specialist in place immediately. They might need to contract for those services. But I think that it is always good at a minimum to know what is best practice, what is our goal that we are striving for. So thank you for walking us through that. We do want to just appeal to any of the questions that might have. We did a great job on timing today. So there is still time that if there are any questions that you might have, I'm going to pause for just a moment on that. And if there aren't, we will get things moving along. That if sometimes we just end early and it's a pleasant surprise, but you still get 90 minutes of credit for being with us today. So I'm going to double check through things.
Yeah, if anybody, Amy, I will send you the Meet Me book, and you can include that in the recording and the handouts for the recording. But anybody who wants to search it out, you can find it on our WSSB Birth to 3 site. Just Googled Washington State School for the Blind. You'll find it on our website.
So what I will do is I will snag that resource from you. After the fact, we will drop that into the follow-up email that we send to all of you. As we get ready to close things out, I do want to let you know that our 5th and final in our Promising Practices series will air in the month of May. Please save the date for Monday, May 9th. On Monday, May 9th, we talk about kindergarten readiness, another transition, if you will.
Another transition. And in that webinar, we will be talking about the 3 prongs of kindergarten readiness, which is child readiness, parent readiness, which we've kind of talked a little bit about this today, and also school readiness. So again, not all about the child, but about all 3 of those prongs.
So May the 9th, please know that there is not a registration link as of yet, so you're not missing anything. It is to come, but if you go to aph.org and you look up Access Academy, once it goes live, it will be there. And so we will be working on getting that registration set very soon. So kindergarten readiness on May the 9th, and it'll be our final in the school year series of early childhood promising practices.
Yes, save the date.